Okay, so I wanted to go over some ways to make a project like this fully 3D printable. So we built this model last week. This is a hinged object, and in this case, a container for a pair of calipers. Hinge or opens and close, or the lid opens and closes and all that. Super good. I'll revert position to where it should be. But one of the issues is we imported, actually, let me close the lid so we can see what's going on there. But we imported this hardware from McMaster-Carr. Perfectly fine. But what happens if, hey, I really like this model, I want to print it, but I don't want to have to order like specialty hardware. Perfectly fine. All I did is just capture the new position for closing the lid. Perfectly fine. Well, let's generate some stuff that you can use. So first, I'm going to hide the hardware, which is the stainless steel rod, or the stainless steel acorn caps, and the inserts there. The insert's actually inside. So, all right. So what I'm left with is just a hole. So you could literally just design this as a pin. And what I mean by that, or design like a pin or something. So what I mean by that is, let's double check, inspect. How big is that round? I forget. That is diameter of 3 millimeters. Great. So let's start a new component. New component, empty, and I'm just going to relabel this automatically as pin. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw just a simple pin to go into this hinge. So start a new sketch. Instead of starting on one of the planes or anything like that, which you totally can, I'm going to use, so that it fits this stuff, I'm going to use the face of this hinge already that I've built and draw on top of that. So let's select there and go right to, and just go to the center here. All right. So basically, I'm going to make a pin that looks like, you know, a standard nail, which honestly, you could totally just use a standard nail if it's long enough. But for here, let's make a couple of circles and such. I want right smack in the middle. I want something that's in between, not all the way larger, but neither is it smaller. That's large as 4 or 5, and in between 4. So let's say 4. Sure. 4 centimeters. Great. Now, one thing to be aware of. You can print you can print parts, things like that, of course. But depending how you orient parts, it will not print perfectly smooth. And what I mean by that is because you are trying to use an extruder, again, basically a hot glue gun that is squishing out hot plastic, so it's going to droop a little bit and trying to make something round. It's not going to work perfectly, but it will work pretty well. But to compensate for that, a good practice to get into is don't make it exactly the same size. What I mean by that is I'm going to make another circle here, and excuse me, actual size is 3 millimeters. Let's drop that down a little bit. Let's say I'm going to make this one 2.9. So it's a 0.1 millimeter smaller than the actual diameter. Perfect. That's going to give me a little bit of clearance when I print these parts. So let me finish the sketch. That's just a very simple thing there. And let's extrude that. So I want the pin itself to extrude, well, let's say I actually need this. Let's say I want it to go a little bit longer. So let's go out. That was, I should have measured this part too, but to that end is 90. So let's make it, I don't know, 92 millimeters long. So I've got a little tab sticking out there. Great. Click OK. I also want to extrude the head of that. So extrude again. And of course, it hid my sketch. So let's go down, unhide the sketch. Should have done that before. Grab both of those and go out 2 millimeters. Let it join to that part. Great. So just double checking, expanding down. What did that join to? Uh-oh. That joined to something, or it didn't join. All right, that's weird. I don't know what it joined against, so that might be a problem later. We'll find out. That's very strange. Let's combine those two. I don't know why that's stayed as two separate parts. So let's select the target, and the second selection is that ring. Join, join. There we go. Great. What is going on here? I got a bad feeling that that second, let's delete this. I think what happened when I used the join, edit feature, join. I think it actually joined something, a different component entirely. So remember, Fusion will work against anything that it sees, and especially if two parts are touching. So let's go and just hide all the other stuff that I don't need right now, because it might accidentally combine with stuff. So let's use that extrusion. There we are. Good. That should work. Join. That is still making two separate bodies. Oh, right. Now I see what the problem is. Because I made that internal circle just slightly smaller, if I zoom in, they're not actually touching. So that second extrusion, the problem is I just needed to select that inner ring there. There you go. Hey, now it's back to one. Okay. Pin. So now I have a pin that would fit down into both parts of my box. Oops. Let me zoom back in. And as I zoom in, you can see that it's ever so slightly smaller than the hinge around it. Now, 0.1 millimeter doesn't sound like much at all. It's not, but it's enough to compensate for the squish that happens with extrusion printers. Remember, the extrusion doesn't just come out as an absolute straight circle or as an absolute straight line. It squishes out a little bit. It bows out. Now look on the board here. The nozzle is coming out. And let's say that the extrusion is coming out. It doesn't just stay like it's square there. The nozzle comes out, or the stuff comes out, and it actually squishes out a little bit. That's a lot. That looks like a whole lot, but it's really, obviously, that's not to scale. So it does squish out just ever so slightly. So adding a little bit of a buffer between parts if you're printing will really help out. Now, do I need to make a gap between the top and bottom? No, those fit together just fine. It's these rounded parts that squish a little bit because they get just a little bit distorted as you're working. One other thing I could do is, since I'm making this in two parts, yeah, let's make one more component, and I'll make a cap for this. But I'm going to nest it, so I'm going to activate the pin component. I'm going to activate and make another component. Let's say pin cap. See, this component is now nested within that cap, or within that pin component. That's all. That's not really doing anything else. And let's make a sketch. I want to make it on the end of there. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to make another circle. What was that, 4? Yep, 4 millimeters out. And then, yeah, that'll work. Finish sketch. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to extrude. I'm going to extrude in one direction up, let's just say 1 millimeter, just a little bit there. Hit OK. Of course, it hid my sketch because it does that. And then I'm going to extrude that bottom. And because the rest of that pin component is already there, when I extrude upwards, it's going to automatically cut away that section there. Pretty slick, pretty convenient. To there. And again, I'm going to hide the top and bottom of the box to make sure it doesn't do anything weird there. Click OK. Great. Now, when I go and activate that full component, what it has done, and let me change my views here, view style to shaded with hidden edges. You can see inside, what I've done is I've just made a little cap for my pin, so that if I were to print these two sides, I could just glue the cap onto the other end of that pin so that it wouldn't just fall out of my hinge. But let me hide the pin itself. And because I extruded it against that pin, it automatically cut a little form-fitting extrusion into that. So it's got a little divot so you can actually glue them back together. It's not just like a cap sitting on top. So a really simple way. Is that the only way to do it? Oh my, no. There's a whole bunch of different ways, but if you were just doing a direct replacement hardware for something else you could print, yeah, a simple pin and cap that you can glue together, something like that, can work wonders. Honestly, you could even measure out if I wanted to redo. Let me figure out what I just hid and all that such. Activate the whole thing, unhide all the things, caliper, about trying to remember what all I hid here. Oh, let's leave those hidden for the moment. Top, bottom, all that stuff. Okay. And let me change back to visual style just with visible edges because that gets real confusing real fast. So I made this little pin that you can print separately. Great, but let's hide that for the moment. And I just want to point out that honestly, you can use any number of things that you can drop in there as a hinge pin. Like I said, if you found a nail that fit, make it to fit a nail. If you made especially a smaller box, you know what you can even use inside of there? A length of filament. So if I wanted to use that, I could use some filament from the printer, which I'm pointing off there too, and just change the diameter of these holes. Filament comes out. The filament we're using is 1.75 millimeters. Make it like 1.8 millimeters, and you can slip a string of filament through there, and even use like a soldering iron, or hell, even a dollop of hot glue on either end, and glue the filament from either side. You got a built-in hinge. So there's a whole bunch of different ways, a whole bunch of simple things you could drop in, external hardware, even more printer material, or 3D print yourself a part that you can use as an actual component in your own design and 3D print the whole thing. So hopefully that helps, gives you some ideas on just different ways you can actually put hardware into a project like this and not actually have to go purchase physical like metal hardware. But if that's what you really want to do, then I highly recommend it because you've already modeled your project to fit specific hardware. So however you want to pursue it, more power to you.